where there's commonality, then yes, there would be similar labelling.
Okay.
But I think maybe the point you're trying to raise is, if we all label it a star, does that make it a star from its own side? Or does that just mean we all happen to agree that it's a star?
Yeah, I guess that's what one would
Yeah. So that's often what people think, but people often give examples, but everyone sees it that way. Okay? But does that mean it makes it that way, or does it just mean we all happen to agree that we see it that way?
As a coincidence? Like
Not a coincidence, I mean, again, maybe in some other cultures they would not see a star. Because the idea of star is just foreign. Like, for example, in many cultures, we see snow. But I think the Eskimos have, something like 20 different things where we see one thing. Why? Because that's imperative for their survival. They need to create those 20 different objects to survive. For us, that's not important, so all of those 20 different things, we just say snow. Because that's enough for us in our culture. In their culture, if they did that, they'd die. They wouldn't survive. That's like an example.
Okay.
Yeah?
Can I do that something?
Sure.
Like, I think of a poison.
For
Poison.
poison.
Poison, yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that is not merely labeled. I mean, in any culture you come from, if you meet poison, if you label it food, still it will function as poison.
Correct. So the labeling has to be meaningful.
Meaningful meaning there is something.
That functionality, it has to be helpful. I mean, it's not helpful to label poison food, you'll die.
Yeah.
Right.
This is why I'm saying it's for me challenging the assumption the poison is merely labeled.
And the reason, and this is something that's still to come, is, and I'll give a brief answer and then we'll unpack it more later, is we're sort of stuck in what's called the two extremes. For us, there seems to be two options. Either there is a real objective functioning world, or it doesn't exist. And so for us to say things are merely labelled seems like we're just making it up, and it doesn't really exist. But that's not what this means. In fact, what we're going to see, merely labelled means functioning world, means causality. Causality means merely labelled, but I have to add some more things to come to that yet. So this is very common. Again, because we're stuck in those, for us there seems to be two choices. Either there is a real objective functioning world, or we're just sort of making it up. But they're the two extremes. And merely labelled is the middle way between those two extremes.
It doesn't, like the term merely labeled doesn't really pointing to this complexity.
Well, we have to add more things again still. It'll still to come. The word merely, again, means only just. It doesn't mean we're just making it up. It means the word merely means really there's no fixed objective world. That's all it means. It doesn't mean we're just making up whatever we want. That's the other extreme of nihilism. But more to come. Okay. So let's add a little bit more. Let's actually go back to these two ideas based on this understanding and see if we can understand these two ideas in a little deeper way. So this is a timeline. This is a seed, and this is the plant that it produces. So we say the plant exists depending on causes and conditions. And of course, the underlying cause for the plant is the seed. The conditions include, of course, soil, sunlight, water, and fertilizer, and so forth. So through those causes and conditions, we have the seed becoming the plant. Now, we believe that things exist independent of us. If that's really the case, there should be a fixed, obvious point at where the seed becomes the plant. So at what point here does a seed become the plant? At what point? Exactly. The point at which the seed becomes the plant is the point at which this configuration of data stops looking like our concept of seed and starts looking like our concept of plant. And we all have slightly different concepts of what it means to be a seed and what it means to be a plant. So for some of us, it's already here. For some of us, it's here. Some of us here, here, here. We decide when the seed becomes the plant. Another point. If two things are in a cause and effect relationship, by definition, they cannot exist at the same time. So seed and plant are in a cause and effect relationship. And here's the question. Does the seed cease existing before the plant comes into existence? So think about it. Does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? Yes or no? There's only two options. If you say no, that means the seed exists at the same time as the plant. Illogical. No is illogical. If you say yes, the seed has ceased to exist. Where is the plant coming from? Yes is illogical. Both no and yes are illogical, meaning our common sense idea of causality based on independent existence is illogical. It cannot function. It's impossible. Why? Because what we do, and this is again back to impermanence, this is why impermanence is so helpful, is there is just a flow. And here, of course, we're talking just physical flow. And what we do is we turn that flow into chunks, discrete objects. But then if we do that, then suddenly causality becomes impossible. For example, impermanence, we often hear impermanence means things are changing moment by moment. And so we have this idea that in the present moment we have a thing, in the next moment it changes, in the next moment it changes, it becomes another thing. Is this impermanence? Impossible. Because if we have a thing existing in the present moment, no matter how short that moment is, during that period of time it's not changing, which means it's not impermanent. Which means, why would it suddenly change? So, this is not impermanence, this is. So, if we turn flow into discrete objects, then there's a big problem. Nothing works. But if we're simply labeling that flow, no problem. We're labeling seed, plant, causality, no problem. But as soon as we think there is a discrete object there existing from its own side, then we have these problems. Nothing can work. Impossible. That's why if we really have an insight into impermanence, experiential, and we really appreciate this, we're this close to emptiness. This close. So again, impermanence is very, very helpful for understanding emptiness. One more point here. We say that the plant exists depending on the seed, the cause. But here we're also saying the seed depends on the plant. How does the seed depend on the plant? And the answer is not that this plant produces more seeds. How does the seed, the existence of the seed, depend on the plant?
If there was the plant would not gone out, there would still be a seed. So
Sorry?
it is depending on the fact that it would not become the plant.
Can you say that maybe? I think you're on the right track. Say that in another way.
If the seed has not become the plant, then it would still be a seed. So it would still be there. So it is dependent on the plant.
It has the potential. It has the potential.
It's like a mother and the child. A mother becomes a mother when she has a child.
Yeah, but something a little bit more.
It's a very from seed. It's
Sorry?
come from seed. It's come.
Yeah, but the answer is not that this plant produces more seeds. That's true, but that's not the answer.
No.
It's defined by its potential to become a plant.
Correct. You can only call this a seed if you have the idea plant. You can only call something a cause if you have the idea result. Whether or not it produces it doesn't matter. But otherwise, if you didn't have the idea of plant, I mean, what would seed mean? I mean, because a seed is something that can produce a plant. That's part of its definition. Similarly, cause, the concept cause, means therefore it potentially can produce a result. Whether or not it does is not sure, but the word cause, or being a cause, means potential to produce result. The word seed, or the seed, means potential to produce a result, a plant. So therefore, cause or seed depends on result or plant. Parts. Things exist depending on their parts. This pen here exists depending on its parts. But can you find a pen here in the basis? Because if we look here, do we find a pen? I mean, is this a pen? Is this plastic tube a pen? Is the contents a pen? Is this tip thing on the end, is that a pen? Wherever we look, there is no pen, there is just parts. But then people say, well, that's because the pen is the collection of those parts. But if we just have those parts there random and we pick them up, we say, well, there's the collection. Then people go, no, it has to be in a certain shape. So then when we start to assemble those parts, at what point does it become a pen? The point at where it becomes a pen is the point at where that collection of stuff closely enough resembles our concept of pen. And our concepts have at least two parts, appearance and functionality. So when that collection that we're assembling, of course none of those bits are a pen, when we're assembling those bits, at the point where that collection or assembly closely enough resembles what our concept of pen looks like, and it seems to function according to our idea of pen, then there's a pen. So what we're saying then is the pen is not the collection of its parts. The pen is merely labelled depending on the collection of the parts. So if we can understand those two statements are not saying the same thing, we're starting to understand something about emptiness. So again, the two statements are the pen is the collection of its parts versus the pen is merely labelled depending on the collection of the parts. Because if the pen was the collection of the parts, if the pen existed there from its own side, it would mean if a caveman came in here, they'd pick it up and was right with it, but they may see some sort of weapon to use. And if a dog came in here, they may see some sort of chewing stick. And if a tiny ant came in here, they may see some sort of home to live in. So is this a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? From its own side, none of those things. From the side of the observer, all of those things. And here also we say that the pen exists depending on its parts. In other words, the whole exists depending on the part. But similar to here, the part also depends on the whole. Because to be able to call this part of a pen, we have to have the idea pen. Otherwise, what does part of a pen mean? It means nothing. So this is how we can start to understand causes and conditions in parts based on this idea of labelling, designation, and conception.
I really get not existing from his own side, but for causes and conditions and parts, we have some hidden assumption that labeling is discrete, right? We have a hidden. We're assuming that labeling is discrete, meaning that something is either a seed or a plant. It can be some percentage of seed, some percentage of plant.
But who decides that? Don't we decide that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm just saying.
Sure. So, yes, and that's what I'm saying, is that our labelling can be as simple or complex as necessary, as we need. In some cases, we need to be very precise, and we may use that sort of labelling if it's helpful. But on other occasions, it's like the Eskimo and the snow. I mean, the Eskimo needs to be very precise in labelling. So they have 20 things that they create. For most other cultures, they just have one thing, snow. Because for Eskimo, that's critical for survival.
But still, the argument under causes and conditions were, one of them was that impermanence is not discrete, meaning...
Oh. It's discrete. What do you mean by the word discrete?
I'm not sure how to say it in English. It's like, either it goes... Yeah, either it's like quantas, like either it's like the boxes you did on the line, right? It's like either they become discrete one after the other,
Right.
or there's some sort of continuum.
Right.
Like time is continuum and minutes are discrete or whatever.
Right, but again, we're not saying here just thinking of quanta or so is the problem. What I'm saying is making whatever way of doing that, we make that into a object, existing from its own side. So we could, again, as long that the thing is not so much, the thing is just understanding that however we look at this, it's in the conceptual framework.
What I'm trying to understand, and that's the problem with that. For example, one of the arguments you gave is that I take the parts of a pen, and then at what point it becomes a pen.
Right.
And my result, and my answer to that, which is maybe wrong, but I'm trying to understand why,
Sure.
is it becomes closer and closer to a pen the more you build it. So it can be any number between 0 and 100% of a pen. So the closer it becomes, the more it looks like a pen, then the more it is a pen for me.
Right, but for you, your concept of pen may be different to another person. So when you see something, you say that's 60%. The other person says, no, that's a pen already.
Yeah, so that's the third one. That's just labeling.
Right, so the point
first
is...
and the second, like,
yeah, so...
why do we need the first and the second arguments?
Oh, it's not an argument, it's just a way of looking at things. Actually, if you really understand all these three, it's the same thing. We are trying to understand this. And to help understand, we create an idea of parts. We create causes and conditions, these concepts to understand. Don't we?
Yeah, I agree that I just don't agree that parts imply that things don't exist on their own side, you know.
Right, so what part would exist from its own side? So okay.
I mean,
Right, okay, let's use this example. The pen exists from its own side?
I don't know.
No, okay, well let's say this pen hypothetically has 5 parts.
Yeah.
So that exists depending on these 5 parts.
Let's assume that. Yeah.
Right. Let's take one of those parts. Does that exist from its own side?
Let's assume no.
Well, it has parts, yeah? Let's say it has 10 parts. Let's pick one of those 10 parts, any one. Does that exist from its own side? Doesn't that have parts? So we can keep going down, 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 atomic, subatomic, there's no bottom. Because if you hit a bottom, it means there's something there existing from its own side, and then if you make up something with a collection of things that exist from their own side, that would exist from its own side, and all the way up. So if you say subatomic particles exist from their own side, then an atomic particle, which is made up of those things which exist from their own side, would exist from its own side. And then you go up, 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 everything would exist from its own side. So either nothing exists from its own side or everything.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. What I'd like to do now is a little meditation investigating these things in front of us that really seem to exist there from their own side. So based on what we've just discussed, let's do that very simple investigation and see whether or not really things are as they seem. So we'll do a 15-minute practice. As always, we begin by preparing the body, back straight, and body completely relaxed. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation, allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. can begin Vipashyana practice of investigating appearances. There really does seem to be an objective, independent world out there. But is that really the case? So open your eyes and focus on an attractive object in front of you somewhere. How does that object appear to you? Does it seem to exist there objectively from its own side? Is that, in fact, how it exists? So investigate closely this object. Does it really exist there from its own side, objectively? Or is that something simply created and labelled by the conceptual mind? Look closely. And does the beauty seem to be there in the object? Is that how it exists?